You're all very welcome to UCD, virtually, of course, and to the special webinar on the MA Irish Literature and Culture. So thank you all very much for joining us wherever you are. Kate Mila Fáilte, you're very, very welcome. I'd like to start by introducing you to Lucy Collins, who will give you an overview and insight into this MA course and tell you about the features and benefits of this course and the variety of modules that you can study. And then I'll introduce you to Loic Wright, who is a former master's student on this course and is now pursuing a PhD. But very quickly first, I'd like to just give you an update on matters COVID related and to confirm to you that the first semester of the next academic year will start on the 21st of September 2020, and that it is very likely that it'll be blended learning, so a mix of online teaching and face-to-face on-campus teaching. And we can talk a little bit about more around that in due course. So again, you're very, very welcome. And without further ado, I will introduce you to Associate Professor Lucy Collins, who is the director on this MA. Thank you.
Hi everyone, and you're very welcome to this session. I'll keep my talk short. I'll just give quite a brief outline of the course and just say a few words, I suppose, about the context for MAs in terms of learning Irish literature, you know, beyond the classroom, if you like, in the UCD setting. I will come back at the end to specific issues around the delivery for this year. As Emer's pointed out, obviously it's a slightly different year than normal. And you may have questions, of course, about that, and we can maybe work that out in the Q&A. And then Loic, of course, will be able to fill you in on his experience as a student on the programme a couple of years back, and also a sense of where he has been since and how the MA has shaped that journey. So just to begin by saying the MA is, in fact, the oldest MA in Irish literature in the world. And as those of you who have already got some experience of UCD will know, that our school, the School of English Drama and Film, is a very large school. And it's in fact the largest university department in Ireland that engages with literature, drama, creative writing and the media arts. So again, as you'll know, the school offers a number of different MAs, and that is relevant to this MA, I think, because it does mean that we have a larger MA cohort that has very often a lot of connections with one another, and it means that there is this kind of vibrant community around MAs in the school, of which the Irish MA is a very important part. The other really interesting feature of this MA is that it has very strong links to cultural institutions beyond UCD, so particularly to the Museum of Literature Ireland. I'm not sure how many of you had a look at the programme last night on RTE about the making of that museum. It's a really fascinating programme, so do have a look if you get a chance on the RTE player, because UCD has very strong connections to that museum, and we will be doing some of our work there, hopefully later in the year. We also have connections to the National Library and to RTE and to the Irish Film Institute also. So there's a sense in which we're very much linked in to the kind of broader Irish cultural landscape. And that's just the one of the pages from the Molly website. Again, it's great to have a look at that. Molly also run podcasts. It's called Radio Molly. So if you're interested in some of the kind of topics and issues that the kinds of things we'll be covering on the MA, you'll get insights into some of those from those podcasts. Just to put up that list there of the staff involved on the programme. Again, those of you who have contact with UCD or have experience in UCD already may know some of us, or have been taught by some of us. I hope so. So you'll see from the list there that there's really three broad areas of specialism. The first is, if we're looking alphabetically, is on Irish poetry. And that's myself and Dr. Katrina Clutterbuck, who teach a poetry course on the MA. But there's also lots of other activities around poetry in the school, particularly around the Irish Poetry Reading Archive that I'll mention in a moment. The other big area of interest in the school is obviously prose, and very specifically James Joyce. So I know many of our applicants over the years have a very particular interest in Joyce's work. So you'll probably be familiar with the names of Anne Fogarty and Luca Crispi in that respect. They're both very well-known critics of Joyce's work. Both of them are involved in the James Joyce Summer School that runs every summer. And they also edit the Dublin James Joyce Journal, which is another really exciting journal that's based in our school. And Fogarty also works on contemporary Irish writing too, so she's kind of a broader interest in Irish prose work. Margaret Keller, of course, is the professor and chair of Anglo-Irish literature in the university. So I'm sure have come across her on social media or in the wider media world. Her field is 19th century literature mainly, but also digital humanities. She's very much involved in the Museum of Literature Ireland and also in the Irish Film Institute too, and lots of other projects. So Margaret really kind of brings that sense of connectivity and network, I think, to the MA. The final area just to highlight, of course, is theatre, and Dublin obviously has a very strong theatre focus, so lots of productions and access to theatre in normal times, and perhaps other ways of accessing theatre and performance areas now. And the two people in the school who focus on or are specialists in this area are Associate Professor PJ Matthews and Dr. Cormac O'Brien. PJ Matthews works on the Irish Revival quite a lot, so the earlier period around the late 19th, early 20th century. He's also a specialist in music, Irish traditional music. He's working that area at the moment, and he's on the board of RTE, so he's quite interested in kind of broadcast and creativity fields. Dr. Cormac O'Brien is also a specialist in gender and sexualities and in Irish masculinities in particular. You might have heard his name associated with that work. And so you can see from the range of people teaching on the course that there's both all the kind of key areas of Irish literature are covered, but we've also got lots of other strings to our bows, if you like, and other areas that we develop through the course of the year. Just to give you a sample timetable for next year. Now, obviously, again, we'll discuss the actual delivery of the course in the Q&A session, but this is the kind of, say, normal timetable that we would operate. So in the first term, the 3 modules will be Irish Poetries, which I teach together with Dr. Karina Clutterbuck, Theorising Irish Cultures, which usually has input from a number of different staff. And that's a really interesting foundational course because it gives different theoretical perspectives on Irish literature. So it's really a chance for you to bring in issues or areas that you might be interested in. We very often address quite contemporary questions and issues, specifically around gender politics. I'm very interested also in spatial politics, so the space of the city and migrant literature in particular, so we address those in that space too. But it's very often a great opportunity at the beginning of the MA for you to bring your own interests in and work on a project there. The third module that we have in the first term is literary research methods. And that's a module that really just opens up the different methodologies that you might use, either theoretical perspectives or other methodologies relating perhaps to archives or to digital media. And it gives you a chance to kind of build those skills and that will be very useful to you, not just on the MA, but in the wider world, but also to start thinking about the areas of the course that you would like to develop towards your final dissertation at the end. Then in the second trimester after Christmas, this is in this year, this will be sort of in a sense the more heavy reading trimester. And we have Joyce's Ulysses, taught by Professor Crispi and Professor Fogarty. We have a module on Irish theatre with PJ Matthews and Cormac O'Brien. And again, that module will very often have input from theatre practitioners. And the third module that we'll have after Christmas is Tradition to the Contemporary, which is convened by Professor Margaret Keller, but again, we'll usually have input from another member of staff, at least one other member. And that is based on prose, usually mainly fiction, and is a course that kind of brings together the longer history of Irish prose. So it goes right back to people like Mariah Edgeworth, but right up to the present. So again, a really great opportunity for those who have an interest in the kind of longer historical context of Irish literature to kind of pick up some of that and develop it. Just to highlight a couple of features that kind of belong perhaps to the wider School of English drama and film context. Obviously, as I mentioned, creative writing has a big role in our curriculum. And so there's a lot of engagement with writers in the school as a whole. In the Irish Poetry Reading Archive, which you may have heard of, which is based in UCD Library, we invite poets in to read for the archive and to discuss their work. Now, sometimes that is linked to a kind of a live reading in UCD, but we have these great digital resources. And of course, these are really important for us now as we're kind of looking to move some of our work online. So if you haven't already had a chance to look at the Irish Poetry Reading Archive's work, it's well worth either going into the digital library part of the UCD library site, or to go into YouTube and just Google Irish Poetry Reading Archive, and you'll get a whole range of really great readings there, and there'll be more to come as well. And we'll be doing, on the poetry course, we'll be doing a bit of work with the archive. So we're hoping actually to kind of be innovative in these times, you know, where we need to be online a little bit more, and to do some projects relating to digital readings. The other final thing I just want to draw attention to again is the presence of these two really interesting journals in the college, in the school. One is the Irish University Review, which is the major journal of Irish studies in the world, and it's based in UCD. And we've just celebrated our 50th anniversary, and all the content in the 50th anniversary issue is free online to read. And so again, if you're interested, have a look at that. I can share the link for that later. It's really good to just give you a sense of where Irish studies is at now, gives you lots of different theoretical perspectives and lots of different interesting work, and also links to people working in the field around the world, because obviously one of the things that we really engage with in this course is the sense of Irish literature in an international context. And we always have international students, of course, on the course alongside you. So I think I'll finish there then, and let Loic say a little bit about his experience as a student on the course, and then you can follow up with any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That was brilliant. I might just encourage people to use, if they can, the chat function or the Q&A button at the end of the screen. If you have any questions at all, we do want to hear from you. So feel free to send any questions you have our way, and we will address them as we move through. So Loic, just to ask you, so you graduated from the Masters in 2017, having come from the undergraduate in English and Spanish. Can you talk to us a little bit about that transition in 2016 before you began your Masters, how you selected this Masters course, and what the transition was like for you?
Yeah, definitely. So by the end of my undergrad in final year, I was picking mostly Irish literature modules. I was trying to stock up, so to speak. I was looking at Beckett, Synge, Yeats, Joyce, and then the wider modules that are offered in second year as well. So I, at this point, kind of knew that I wanted to follow Irish studies, and I knew that I was doing a lot of extracurricular reading. So I wanted to see how I could bring that to a master's, but also how I could be taught more and how other people I knew could bring what they knew. So I was particularly interested in mid-century fiction, which was often kind of overlooked. But then I had other colleagues that I didn't know were interested in Standish O'Grady or a lot of revival material. So it was great to kind of interact with other people, and it just made all the difference that we had this bedrock of shared interest, and that every Tuesday and Thursday when we'd go to classes, there was always that base level that we could only just build on from there. So I think then afterwards, I was particularly interested by the fact that, especially a module like Theorizing Irish Culture, is so adaptable. And my MA, as you mentioned, was 2016 to 2017. So it was sandwiched in between two hugely important referenda in Ireland. And that was a hugely important module then for seeing how cultures are mobilized in these discourses over huge life-changing and society-changing events, but also how then those events are imprinted in the cultures that someone will go on to study later on. So that's what I found particularly interesting. And also just, I started as a virulent Joycean, for lack of a better word. And
Oh,
I,
we talked you out of that.
yeah, I'm a recovering Joycean, but I was so kind of dependent on, or sure that I was going to research Joyce. And within the first semester, I started working with Dr. Cormac O'Brien on masculinities, which was a field I'd never heard of. And now I'm finishing my second year on masculinities on mid-century fiction, and I haven't looked at Joyce at all, which is both a blessing and a curse. Like, I mean, I'm delighted that I've moved into a new arena and I still have that knowledge, and I still work at the James Joyce Centre as well. So everything I've worked on in the MA just contributed to this forward trajectory, I suppose. But I think the good thing about the MA is that it's not just about forward, it's also sideways. As I mentioned about a module like Theorizing Irish Culture, it's these things that I hadn't considered before that took the blinkers off, so to speak, that I can look sideways and learn these new skills and learn about, again, how I said, Irish cultures are mobilized, or how Irish cultures are seen abroad, or how international perspectives influence Irish outlooks. And also modules, as you mentioned as well, like literary research methods. That word literary could really be kind of in brackets sometimes, because so many of the skills you learn in that module are transferable. I worked in an advertising company for 2 years, both during and after my master's, and one of the things that they were particularly kind of impressed by and they relied on me for was that ability to work to deadlines and to adapt. But also in the advertising industry, a lot of the basic premise for an ad is relatability, or something that you recognize. And so knowing a lot about Irish culture and media helps in that process as well. So it's really not, you're not limited to academia or cultural institutions. It's really, as I said, like sideways crab walking, as they say, in terms of later careers. So it's been kind of really beneficial for the most part.
And can I ask, did you find there was a big transition to what it was like being a student on as an undergraduate student and a master's student?
Yes, but in the best possible way. That if I ever brought something up in class and the tutor or lecturer kind of wanted to tease a little bit more out of it, the only thing that I felt then was wanting to go home and then research more on that topic, as opposed to not wanting to go back to the class for fear of being ill prepared or underprepared. So the jump, it's also down to the fact that I had such a passion for this topic in particular that it never really felt like work. And I know that sounds like a corny thing to say, but every point when I would, leave the class, I was happy to go to the library and find something new. And I still get that. If I find a new book that no one's written on, I'm delighted about this. So, that jump was a big jump, but in the best possible way. It just felt like I had a lot more on my shoulders, but I could definitely take it, so to speak.
Good for you, Loic. It's impressive. Some of the students who are with us today aren't familiar with the School of English. Can you describe a little bit what it's like, the School of English, from your perspective?
I think the one word I think of is dynamic and versatile, that every year, or at least every 2 years, there's a new module coming up, or there's people working on new modules. And it's never a case of, the work has been done, you can kind of cruise now. It's always developing and looking outwards. I mean, we just have to look at the partnership with Molly, that they're always pushing the boundaries, and there's always new modules being developed, and even authors that hadn't really been considered are now getting a lot more time. And there's a lot more inclusivity as well, which I think is obviously hugely important. So I think dynamic is definitely the best word I can think of. It's also because it's the School of English, drama, film, and then there's obviously some overlap. In the masters, we watch Michael Collins and talk about how Neil Jordan's film is very much a vehicle for talking about the Good Friday Agreement, these kind of things. So while it is literature and culture, it has that kind of more open perspective where you can bring in everything that contributes to an overall narrative, I guess. And that's really a symptom of the School of English and how it's ever changing, and it's not really stuck for the most part.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And can I ask you, so you progressed from the MA onto a PhD, you decided to go down that road. How's that going for you, and what sort of area are you interested in moving forward?
So yeah, I had, after my master's, I was kind of jaded in terms of just reading. So I took a little break from academia then. So I worked as an English teacher in Spain for a bit. So even then, just basic kind of skills that I'd learned were also hugely beneficial there. And then I came back in 2018 to start my PhD, which is, as I mentioned, in mid 20th century fiction. So 1931 to 1965. And I look at how Irish masculinity was measured, especially after independence, and how cultivating a new Irish identity meant a new masculinity. And so I found that a lot of the MA has really just kind of bolstered it. You know, everything, even things I hadn't really thought of since the MA, are still kind of coming back occasionally. And I remember something like The Real Charlotte by Somerville and Ross, which was a book that we read on the Tradition to Contemporary course, is now kind of, I don't know, peeking its head up again in my work sometimes as a reference point. So I've just finished the second year and I'm tutoring as well. But I'm also quite enjoying working in the James Joyce Centre, because it's bringing what can sometimes be seen as esoteric, you know, academic work can often be seen as kind of marginalized or for a specific few, but bringing that to somewhere like the Joyce Centre, or I'm sure people who will go on to work in Molly, you get to bring your interest to the wider public, and especially when it's international audiences who make their Bloomsday pilgrimages or whatever it is, they want nothing more than to hear about an Irish person reading it, or someone who's read about Irish literature or anything, you know, as long as it's this empathy lab and where you get to kind of discuss the same topic or the same work and everybody enjoys it. So I think working in cultural fields, but also in the tourism industry, is just, it goes kind of hand in hand with the MA for the most part.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And I just wonder, do you, imagining back in 2015, 2016, when you were planning your postgraduate pathway, if you like, and what you were going to do, would you have any advice for yourself looking back?
I think, especially if you go on to do it, it does feel like you don't know anything, because part of that jump is, you know, you may feel that you know more, you make more effort than a lot of people in your class, which is often the case sometimes. But when you're in the MA, it feels like, oh, everybody knows more than I do. Whereas that's really not the case. And as I mentioned, like, literature in general is an empathy lab. You know, somebody reads something and they glean from it what they recognize through their own experience or something they know about. So everybody brings their own thing. So it's really, that's probably the more jarring part. But I would say, like, UCD is selective enough in that they recognize your potential and they're hardly going to just let you cruise in. They really want you and they know that you're able to take on the workload. So I think it's good to do that little extra reading, but it's not good to kind of undermine all the reading you've already done, that you bring a lot more than you recognize. And you'll notice that in the classes, and people will start, you know, you might get an email someday and someone says, oh, this person actually said that you're an expert in this field. And then that's a great sense of validation when you can see that people are talking about you in terms of they've recognized your own ability. So I'd say that's one of the tougher parts, but it's definitely not that tough if you kind of give yourself a bit of breathing room. And when it comes down to it, you're enjoying the material as well.
Lucy, I have a question for you. We'll give Loic a chance to have a glass of water and take a breath. We have a student with us who's very interested in the archiving element and is wondering, would the presence of the poetry archiving in this MA strengthen career opportunities in that field, or are there elements of this master's that would be useful for someone who's interested in a career in archiving?
Well, I think, I mean, obviously the archives is a separate field in its own right, so it is a separate discipline. But we have had students in the past, in fact I have one this year, who is very interested in getting into that area, and she sees this MA as a way of beginning work in the archival area and familiarizing herself and learning before perhaps making the decision to get into it in a more concerted way. The different courses engage with archives in different ways. I mean, obviously my particular specialism is poetry, and we work with the Irish Poetry Reading Archive and with some really great poetry material in special collections. But we also make use of, very often either in class or digitally, we make use of archives, archival material gathered elsewhere. So say if we're looking at a poem, we can look at versions of a poem that, in the author's handwriting and so on, that's gone through various stages. I know that certainly in the past, I think PJ has used the Abbey Theatre Archive as well in his work. So there's different ways in which that can come in, and certainly in terms of if that's an area that you're particularly interested in, then through your own essays or through your own projects or your dissertation, for example, you can definitely develop that. And also network a little bit in that context, make some contacts in different archives around Ireland as well, and then perhaps prepare the way for later work. Yeah.
Okay, that's very, very useful. And I'm just wondering, Lucy, do you have any advice for students gathered here who are at that crossroads between their BA and their MA? What sort of things should they be thinking about?
Well, I think as Loic has really demonstrated, I mean, the MA is really, in a sense, a great space to think about your future plans, because it both consolidates and develops the work you've already done. And as Loic pointed out, you're in a smaller group. You're really able to work very intensely, and you've a lot more freedom in the kind of work you do. Because of these links to the larger kind of cultural networks and institutions in Ireland, you do get a great chance to kind of get the inside track on those, make contacts there, or do work that links to those areas. And therefore, perhaps if you're interested in careers in those areas, or in tourism or in marketing, as Loic has pointed out, this is a really good preparation for that. And I think, obviously committing to years further study is a big thing. It's a big thing to think about. But I think it does allow you to really consolidate what you've done as an undergraduate, and plan for the future. So it's a really great opportunity to do that.
Okay, that's great. Any reflections from you, Loic, before we close out the session?
Just building on the archiving question there, actually, when I did my master's, Dr. Katrina Clutterbuck and Lucy Collins in my class actually worked on the archives quite a bit, and we ended up curating Lucy ended up curating with some partial input on Kavanagh Reconsidered, which was the 50th anniversary of his death exhibition. So we did get to work with that and then bring it into, as I said, a more digestible and manageable product, so to speak, to put it kind of rather cynically, for kind of broader audiences to engage with. So there was definitely some level of interaction with archives, which I thought was actually quite interesting for sure, because it was a nice insight, albeit brief, into some level of curatorship as well, which is obviously the direction I'm sure some people would be interested in going down. But in terms of the wider masters, I'd say no, like everything we've kind of touched on already. And I just thought that for the calendar year that it was, I mean, 2 semesters and then a thesis writing semester, it was really just that idea of consolidating what you've learned in the undergraduate, but also honing your skills. And if you're interested in academic career, definitely putting your name out there for, better or for worse sometimes, you just at least get people to get a sense of who you are. And there's always often mixers or lectures that you can attend where you can briefly discuss with other scholars who will most likely recognize you later on should you go down that road. So it's really only beneficial for the most part.
Thank you, Loic. That's great. And Lucy, any closing words of wisdom from you?
Okay, well, I don't know about the word wisdom, but I suppose just to say, I mean, Loic is in a way the best demonstration of, first of all, how much fun you can have on the course. Like really, because we do have smaller groups and they tend to be close knit, it is a really great opportunity, just to develop your own interests and to give yourself that space, I suppose, but also, to build skills that will be very useful and praised and looked for in the marketplace as well. well. So, you know, and we certainly do look for that. We do look to build skills that are useful to you in future. But also just to say, you know, I'm happy I put my email address up there in the chat. So if anybody wants to email me separately, maybe if you haven't got a question now, but you think of something later, by all means do. Or if you want to have a chat on the phone or something separately, that's absolutely fine. You know, if you want to hear a little bit more about the specifics of the course or how it will be developed, by all means, get in touch.
Great. Well, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Loic. And yes, please do stay in touch with us. If you have any questions, we want to hear from you. So thanks to everyone for joining us. Stay safe, and we look forward to meeting you in UCD soon.